Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. This is your host, Tony Cañas. Today we have a truly special episode. Today I'm joined by Wendy Davis Johnson. For once, I don't have to ask how to pronounce your last name. I think I got those right. Uh,
Yes, you did.
the author of Faith and Purpose, The Life and Vision of Insurance Icon, Brian Duperrealt. Wendy, thank you so much for joining me today. First of all, and also thank you for your flexibility. I had to reschedule once because the last few weeks got extremely busy, but I am really, really, really excited for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Fantastic. So, why this book? What inspired you to write Faith and Purpose, and why focus specifically on Brian Duperreault?
Such a good question. So I have worked on and off with Brian for about 30 years, beginning in, 1997, when he had just arrived a couple of years earlier at ACE in Bermuda, now Chubb, obviously, from AIG. And I had met Brian when he originally came back to Bermuda. As you know, he was born in Bermuda, and it is one of the recurring themes in his life and one of the recurring influences. And I am a Bermudian, born and bred. And I had met him through a variety of philanthropic initiatives where I'd been providing some communication support. And one day he called me and said, would you like to come down and meet me? I'd like to discuss communications. This is, shortly after he arrived at ACE. And I said, sure. I mean, by then everybody in Bermuda had just come to have such respect for him, and not only for his business acumen and what he was doing with ACE, but also Brian was so committed and is so committed to the Bermuda community and its well-being. So I went and met him, and he said, I met with him, and he said, how would you like to set up the communications function at ACE? And I said, Brian, I know nothing about insurance. At the time, I was heading up a trade association in Bermuda that the objective was to market Bermuda as a premier international business jurisdiction around the world. But my knowledge of the commercial P&C industry was you couldn't even write on the head of a pin. But he said, look, you know communications. I know insurance. We'll teach each other. So I've been working with him on and off ever since. And I was at Hamilton just before he went to AIG, returned home to AIG, as he says. I had been working with him at Hamilton. And as it approached him about to leave Hamilton, and as I had just written, I think it must have been about 9 keynote speeches for him in one year, because everybody wanted to hear from Brian. This was like his second emergence from a second retirement. People started to say, Wendy, you should write Brian's biography. You've been working with him, you know him so well, you've had such insight, and a variety of companies that he's been building. And I just, dismissed it out of hand when people were saying that. But then as we approached that juncture, and also Brian, a couple of years later, Brian leaving AIG, I did reach out to him and I said, Brian, I honestly think you should have a biography written about you. And he did not want to. I mean, he really pushed back. He said, no, 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 I don't care. He is you probably know Tony. He's a very humble man. He doesn't like the limelight. He's, loves the cut and thrust of the industry and the whole exercise and dynamic in building a company, but he never seeks out accolades or praise or whatever. He will, if it's going to enable the company he's working for. But anyway, after talking with him back and forth, he did finally say, you know what? I've got 3 adult sons. They are now having children. More and more, they're asking me, so, what was your life like when you were growing up? What did you do? Hey, Grandpa, what's your life been like? And he sees it more as an opportunity, or he ended up seeing it more as an opportunity to have a record of not only what he did and has done as professionally, because he's clearly not finished yet, but also personally. And so that really was what the tipping point was, is that he finally said, it's a good way to have something to leave my children and grandchildren and anybody else who might be interested. So that was the road to it. And then the final sort of catalyst was that realization of, what his kids and grandkids might find interesting.
That is fantastic. So thank you for that. So you had known him for decades by the time you actually wrote the book.
Yes.
What uh what if anything surprised you most as you dug deeper into the story to actually turn it into a book?
That's such a good question. I have to say first that I was so gratified with the openness, not only that Brian brought to the exercise of doing this, but also his wife, Nancy. The book would not have been possible, I don't think, without Nancy Duperreault's support. They're a wonderful couple, and that's why Nancy is so prominently featured in the book. They are so supportive on equal footing. There's a quote in the book from Nancy's cousin, Mary Lynn Hamilton, saying, "There would be no Brian without Nancy." And I came to believe that to be true in many respects. I guess in the context of your question, what was the surprise? While I have known both Brian and Nancy through working with Brian, reporting to him in his position as chairman and CEO of a variety of companies, it isn't a social friendship. It's a business, a warm and very, I admire and respect him enormously, but it is a business relationship. He has been a colleague of mine. So this ability to see behind the curtain in a way that very few people have access was not only a wondrous experience, but it was surprising in the sense that there was so much I didn't know about the two of them and about their lives, their respective lives individually, and then what their lives have been like together. So that was one of the most interesting surprises. There were a lot of things in the research I did in going back, not only in Brian's history and heritage and ancestry, but also in Nancy's, where I discovered a lot of things not only clearly I didn't know, but neither of them knew it either. So that was kind of fun. I'd say, "Hey, look what I found. Did you know
That's
this?" And
awesome.
they'd say, "Oh, didn't know that." And then, even though I was there at the table for various mergers and acquisitions, um, there would have been clearly conversations that I wasn't privy to. And Brian was able to recount some of them. And that was very, very interesting. And then I'd say the final thing that wasn't a surprise, but it was great learning for me. I wasn't working with Brian the second time he went back to AIG after he left Hamilton Insurance Group. So I really did have to do a lot of research about AIG's background, its history, and how it came to be where it was in 2017 when he went back. And that was fascinating, not simply because it's a remarkable story, but also from the point of view of somebody who's been in the industry. As you know, Tony, the industry is a fascinating
Absolutely.
sector, fascinating dynamics, and the people in it are really worth studying, particularly that generation of Hank Greenberg
And
and,
sadly, we
yeah,
if you walk into the Borders or Barnes and Noble, if those still exist, or local bookstores, go into the business section, you'll be lucky to find one book
yes,
about,
that's
right,
true.
like maybe about AIG, but that's about it.
Yeah, no,
There's not enough of them.
absolutely. And they have had such an impact on the world and on the way
Hmm.
the financial markets work and how, people recover from disaster, and particularly the commercial P&C business. I mean, it really is a lacking there. Hopefully this book is a bit of a contribution. But anyway, that whole the study for me of AIG, its background, what Hank Greenberg was doing, to revolutionize the industry in the 70s and 80s and going into the 90s is just fascinating. So there was a lot of varying levels of surprise and learning for me.
Absolutely. There's at least one book about the story of AIG. There might be more. The
I
one that I
think
can
there are
think.
about three. There are
Okay.
three that I read because I've
Oh,
tried to
okay,
read
okay,
everything
okay.
I could get my hands on. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Mm.
If the authors of any of those books are listening, I would love to have you on the show. All right. Brian led really, really major institutions in our industry, right? AIG, Marsh McLennan, Hamilton, and the Bermuda piece, right? Bermuda for those of us, at least in the U.S. market, and I've spent my entire career in the U.S. market. For those in the U.S. market, there are two institutions that are basically, I think of them as Insurance Neverland and Hogwarts. So Insurance Neverland is Bermuda, which I have not had the chance to visit yet, but it's on the bucket list, and Hogwarts, which is Lloyd's of London. Um, so 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 uh, so yeah, he's just led really, really major institutions that have a huge effect. Uh, as studying his career, what leadership themes were consistent throughout the different companies he led?
I will answer that question. I do have to comment on Bermuda as
Absolutely.
Neverland because, actually in the book, Brian describes what he expected when he moved from AIG and having been based in New York and prior to that, running, the Japan and Korea offices of AIG. He wasn't sure what to expect when he came. He thought, oh, he'd have to go get his underwriters off the beach to bring them back to the office. And he was bowled over by the work ethic, the um, just the talent, the expertise that's based there. I mean, it is a rich, mature market. And actually, when Brian first arrived, there was this rivalry between Lloyd's and Bermuda, where
Interesting.
Bermuda
Okay.
was this upstart, and what did they think they were doing with this centuries old market and
Uh-huh.
in London? And now it's a mutually beneficial relationship
Fantastic.
between the markets. But Bermuda's market is insurance and reinsurance is a remarkable and very mature and very
Fantastic.
dynamic market. Um, so I would say that as far as leadership is concerned, and Brian's leading these companies. And in fact, in the book, he has at the front there, we've put in the front 10 thoughts on leadership, which actually on the website for the book, duperreaultbio.com, that can be downloaded, that section,
Fantastic.
10
I will include
thoughts
the link in the show notes.
on leadership. Yeah. And it's really worth reading because, so I'll just run through a few of them. One of the obvious that isn't new to Brian, but he's done it remarkably well, is making sure all the employees understand where the company's going, why it's going there, and what their role is in, getting to success. And he has been able to do that with every company. He has an ability to engender a desire to it's going to sound kind of odd, but I felt it too. It's a desire to kind of make him proud of what you're doing. You really want to reach the standard that he implies. He never says, "This is my standard and you must reach it." But yet, just by walking his own talk and setting examples, of ethical, moral behavior, being honest, being open, being transparent, being consistent, being decisive, being authentic. That's almost number one. You just want to follow where he has described you're going. So getting everyone in lockstep is definitely one. Another one is communication, which always was music to my ears. He really understands that you have to communicate often, well, and repeatedly to get people to understand what the expectations are. People don't hear one thing one time and get it. It's just not the way we absorb information. And Brian really understands that. So he's very good at communication. He also he really feels very strongly about not reading management books. People always say to him, what book do you read? Why are you such a good manager? And he says, he doesn't. He loves historical novels. There are fictional novels he loves as well, nonfiction as well, biographies. But as far as management, he is a learner. And he says he learned a lot about leadership when he was in the Army, the US Army. He said he just learned to see, you could tell right away who was a leader, who people wanted to follow, and he tried to analyze why that might be. And then other direct reports he's had and managers he's had over the years, he's learned from them. And then he says, and you adopt what works for you because you can't pretend to be something you're not, because people will see through that immediately. So those I think are really.
Wonderful.
Oh, and there is one more, and actually it's about organizational development, which I think is a good insight in what he does. He really believes that decisions about executive management, middle management, that sort of thing, have to be made for the greater good, for the greater collective good. You can't make decisions about, reorganization and management team or your executive based on personalities, because people will always see that that's the reason it's being done, and it flies in the face of any strategic plan that you may have. So, for example, he knows that, he has seen where you have an extremely valuable, let's say chief underwriting officer, and people don't want to lose whomever that is, and so they will rejig, a team to accommodate whatever it is that person may be indicating. Maybe they want to move on, and you don't want to lose them, and you say, okay, we'll do this so that you're even more exalted. And Brian will say that never works, because everybody knows the reason you're doing it is an artificial reason. It's not a strategic reason. They start to resent it, and it creates a gap between your strategy and your execution. So I think those are the main things that he would recount. And of course, he will always say underwriting is king.
Fantastic. This is already
Underwriting and risk selection
this
coupled
is
with culture.
this is already a master class in business. So people, go read the book. Wow. Okay. I found it very, very interesting. So my business career has been here in the US. And I'm 42. I've read a lot of business books over the last, let's call it 20 years. Um, I found it very interesting the inclusion of the word faith in the title, right? We just don't see the word faith and the word love. We just don't see those much in business books, especially not in the title. What role did faith play in his leadership style and business decisions?
Oh, such a good question, Tony. Um, so Brian and Nancy are very faithful people. They have different versions of the faith they follow, and it doesn't matter to either of them in their partnership. It is the absolute foundation of everything for them. And the precepts of, in Brian's case, I can't speak for Nancy, and it's not appropriate that I do, but in Brian's case, his education was Jesuit, and the sense of service and doing unto others and being a benefit to everyone within your sphere of influence is primary. And I have experienced that, working directly with Brian, that he respects and treats with dignity every person that he comes in contact with. And he will always take the right thing to do road. So it is really his litmus test. And he will say, and it is said quite often in the book, that key moments in his life have been touched by the hand of God. And he believes that in his heart. And it would be an oversight not to have included in this book um, a a description of the manner in which faith guides his life and the decisions that he makes. And he will say he consults the Bible. He feels it's an excellent source of counsel, and not only counsel but solace in times of stress and difficulty. So it's in the title, and it runs throughout the whole
Thank you.
book.
Uh, Not surprising at all that he had a Jesuit education. It shows. So thank you for helping us understand that. Um, how did Brian's approach to risk and innovation shape the modern insurance world, especially nowadays areas like insurtech? This is uh, an insurtech podcast. I happen to come from traditional insurance, and I happen to interview some traditional insurance people. But yeah, how has his approach to risk and innovation affected insurance, especially when it comes to insurtech?
His approach to underwriting was certainly forged in the crucible of the AIG environment. So it is at the at its core the belief that risk selection and then expert underwriting is everything. And there's a great description in the book, which I encourage everyone to read it if they can get. And it's very easy to get a copy now. There's an online order
Mm-hmm.
process, but he he feels very strongly that the exercise in developing a well balanced, profitable portfolio has been led astray by what he feels is misunderstandings in what is quote unquote good business and what is quote unquote bad business. And there are various descriptions throughout the book where he says, look, he would come across a book of business and it was performing terribly. And he tried to figure out why it was. And the underwriters he spoke to would say, well, we chose this kind of business because everybody had the interpretation that that was one of the more competitive risks, and our competition was doing it, and also it may have been a market where everyone was discounting and they were going for top line rather than bottom line growth. I mean, there could have been any number of factors, but he feels you've just got to strip away those considerations and influences, and look at the basics of analyzing the risk, analyzing your own portfolio, clearly bringing underwriting smarts to it. And then his position was he would encourage and say to his underwriters, look, you make the right decision. You tell me why you're making that decision. And if you can defend it, and I will stand behind you no matter what the market, no matter what the brokers say,
Fantastic.
I will be there for you. I'll take the hit. And so I would say, as far as risk is concerned, that has been the manner in which he's approached it. He also is very hands off. If he feels if the right people are doing the right job, he's not going to get in their way as long as he feels they can justify the decisions they're making. As far as innovation and insurtech is concerned, well, risk and innovation, he's always taking in that context of justifiable risk selection. He's always willing to consider something that might be outside the plain vanilla box of risk, right? Um, but as far as insurtech is concerned, people often would say that Hamilton was set up as an insurtech
Very early
because
one,
of
yeah.
its premise that data analytics and
Mm-hmm.
disciplined underwriting could redefine the insurance industry, because there was at the time and still is woeful analog processes that were holding the industry back. Um, it was not an insure tech though, because it really was taking risk, two sides of a balance sheet, underwriting and investments. And the learning that was so interesting with that company, with Hamilton in its early years, was that the relationship with Two Sigma, which was the providing the data analytics, and Hamilton clearly providing the underwriting, was a an insurer, a technology company partnering with an insurance company, but the two needed to learn about each other's sectors before there could be any meaningful partnership. And that was a fascinating journey for everybody because, on the technology side, and these guys at Two Sigma and their computer scientists and their data scientists are just, amongst the best in the world. They would say, hey, look, we can do this product, bring to the market. And, on the Hamilton side, I said, well, yes, yes. However, there are 50 different insurance company commissioners in the US, and it's not that simple.
Uh,
The regulations don't mean speed to market. So particularly in the US, where the test was on how data analytics could really reinvent the manner in which small risks, and sort of Main Street USA risks were underwritten, and that whole rate quote bind, policy issuance process. So it really was a sort of eye-opening experience on both sides of the aisle of, you can't just assume that two brilliant sets of human capital are going to naturally and by some weird process of osmosis be able to work together. So that was learning for everybody. But they were not an insure tech company. They certainly led the way in saying, and Brian had been saying this for a long time. The insurance industry was a laggard in adopting digitization, an absolute laggard. And he gave a speech once at a Lloyd's market event, saying, if the industry doesn't get with it, and really get up to speed on digitization, somebody else is going to do it for, they're just going to come in and swoop in and Uberize the industry. So yeah, it was interesting to watch that dynamic.
Fantastic. I love that quote. You can't just assume that 2 billion sets of human capital will work together through magical osmosis. I added the magical piece. But that is a wonderful, wonderful quote, and it continues to this day to capture the reality that we live in the insurance slash insurtech worlds, which more and more Matteo Carbone likes to say they're one thing, and they are becoming one thing, but the two sides have a hard time understanding each other to this day. It's getting better. The title mentions the word purpose. So what was Brian's purpose, and how did it evolve over the years?
He truly loves the insurance industry, truly loves everything about it. He loves the sense of risk taking. He loves the analytics of it. Um, so the actual ebb and flow of being an insurance company is something he finds exhilarating. On a larger scale, there's such purpose to the industry. And this is one of the opportunities the industry has to attract younger people into it. It's still a challenge to do that
Mm-hmm.
because the industry has a really bad image.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, you say
Yep,
insurance
yep,
and
yep.
people they just glaze
Oh
over,
yeah.
right? But there is such purpose. And I remember Brian saying at one point, to as far as millennials are concerned, at the time it was how do you get millennials to choose insurance as a career? He said it should be catnip to millennials who
I
are
agree
purpose
completely.
driven, and because you're protecting, you're enabling, you are providing sleep well, opportunities. So we'll take care of your risk, and then you can dream your dreams. So there's such an opportunity for having a purpose in insurance, and he is driven by that as well. That there's an inherent greater good in what the industry does.
That is fantastic, and I shared this with you before we started recording. But you talked at the beginning of how humble he is, and my
Yes.
experience. back in 2017, I wrote the book on how to engage millennials in the insurance industry, called Insuring Tomorrow. At some point during writing of that book, I had ran into some uh, some article by him or some quote by him. I can't remember exactly, but I added him on LinkedIn and kind of thanked him for it. Told him that it was going to be included in the book. And he accepted my LinkedIn connection and replied. This is before he had gone back to AIG, but he was literally running Hamilton. I did not expect a reply. I was very surprised that he accepted it and he replied, and I will forever remember that. I'm sure that at times he faced moments of doubt and fear. How did he handle those setbacks, and what can the rest of us learn from his approach?
Well, his faith is what he will always depend on. Um, he there's not much to elaborate on that in particular because it is such a compelling um, environment that he exists in as far as his faith guiding, comforting, um, leading the way. Uh, but he also there is it's an interesting combination because there is this deep faith, deep and abiding faith, but there's also this very analytical brain. And the one thing about Brian is he does not get tied in knots about stuff. You know, he will ask questions, he will analyze a situation, and then he feels that you get to the point where you have enough information and you got to make a decision, regardless of what it is. And it might be something that is personally distressing. It might be a professional challenge of any description. But he does feel that you really do have to decide, right, I have asked all the questions there are, and now I have enough information to proceed. And you may be right, you may be wrong. If you're wrong, you'll course correct, but you have to have the literal faith and figurative faith that you will succeed in the direction that you want to go. So that is in decision making. But as far as being perturbed or disturbed or um, and upset and looking for guidance, one, he does not dwell unnecessarily on misfortune. And two, that is driven by his deep and abiding faith.
Fantastic. Is there a particular favorite story or anecdote that really captures, in your opinion, the best captures who he is as a person?
Oh, there's so many. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I do have one, though, that I think is very much in the vein of what you were talking about, Tony, where you reached out to him on LinkedIn and he responded. That's so Brian, right? So I'll give you a quick example if I'll try and make it as quick as I can. So there is a group in Bermuda, they're called the Imperial Group, and they are a grassroots organization dedicated to community service and to bringing the Bermuda community together in unity. They're very they have been for about 20 or 30 years, very committed to finding ways to break down the barriers in a country like Bermuda, where you can have racial tension, you can have economic tension. There are obviously socioeconomic issues like there are in any community, and the Imperial Group is dedicated to finding paths through that. They heard Brian speak at a some conference somewhere, and were very impressed with his essential premise of how you reach out to embrace varying points of view and work together to for the greater good. So they called up his assistant and asked if they could have a meeting with them. Now, and he immediately said yes. He didn't know who they were. They just were. They described what they were interested in. Now, this was at the time, this was in Bermuda, and it was in the typical, wood paneled offices. Brian was on the top floor of the building. He had his executive around him. And these guys are very grassroots. There's nothing pretentious about any of them. One of them, a lovely gentleman named Eugene Dean, is about 6'5". He wears a very tall turban on his head, and at the time was always barefoot. And so they went up to Brian's offices, and of course, everybody is looking around. And who are these guys? This is not the CEO of, this insurance company or that insurance company. So everybody was very startled to see them all go in. And they were in there for about 2 hours. And Eugene, who I interviewed for the book, describes this as, when they came, first of all, they were just bowled over by the manner in which they were received by Brian. And Eugene says, his quotes in the book are, here was this man at the top of the business ladder in Bermuda, and it was as if he was one of us. We felt as though we were talking to someone who had been with us always. And they to this day, and this was in the late 90s, to this day they recount this story. Anyway, then Eugene says after this wonderful encounter, they go to leave Brian's office, and as they open the door, it's as if everybody outside has been having their ear to the door to try and figure out what was going on with these guys, and out they come. But I think that's a perfect example of Brian will take a meeting when he feels it's something of interest, something where he can make a difference, something he could listen to. It doesn't matter who it is. He's selective. I'm not saying that he'll just, have any meeting anytime,
He has
but
to.
there are multiple examples where people did tell me when I was interviewing people for the book where they just couldn't get over the welcome he gave them, his easy access, the genuine kind of listening, great questions. I interviewed 100 people for the book, and more than 75% of them had stories like that. That's very, very typical of his humility and his just walking amongst the people. He's comfortable in his own skin, and he just gives everybody the same dignity and respect that he feels everyone should deserve.
That is beautiful. Thank you. Um, if if one of his grandkids were starting in insurance today, or great grandkids, I don't know, whatever that proper generation is, if one of his grandkids were starting in insurance today, what advice do you think Brian would give?
It's interesting. None of his three sons, have gone into insurance.
Okay.
One is studying to be he is a doctor, and he's studying to specialize in anesthesiology. Another is a remarkable, not only spear fisherman, but also expert in a Japanese art of fish rubbing, where the fish is rubbed against a specialized paper and its imprint. There is a Japanese word for this, which I will not
Okay.
try to say.
Uh-huh.
And then the third was for years worked as a chef in Michelin rated restaurants in New York, and now is employed in in an interesting restaurant slash technology company, which is um, has an interesting business proposition. But anyway, so none of his kids went into insurance. If his grandkids were interested, I'm sure, first of all, Brian would never push them into it. But if they were interested, he would say, look, start at the bottom, start at an entry level, learn everything you can in every regard. And he did that. Brian did that, particularly at at AIG, where he spent 21 years. So that's where he started literally at the bottom, worked his way up. But he took every opportunity to learn. He started as an actuary, got qualified as an actuary, but asked to be put into an underwriting position because he felt he had to understand that. He went all over, took lateral moves in his career path just so that he had a completely comprehensive understanding of the industry. And, part of going to Marsh was, it was an opportunity to see another side of the equation, right? But so I mean, I'm speaking for him. I don't know what advice he'd
Completely agree.
give them, but I'm pretty sure he'd say, look, Just get whatever experience you can. And also, I'm pretty sure he would say, if you don't like it, don't stay. You
Fantastic.
got to love what you're doing. Choose a career you love that's going to make you happy. And if it's insurance, that's wonderful. It isn't. Find out what it is.
All right. So you mentioned that you had to that you had to is not the right word, that you interviewed 100 people for the book. How long did the project take? I mean, in one way, it took a couple of decades of knowing him, but how long did the project take once you sat down to actually create this book?
It was 4 years. We thought it would be two. We started the interviews in early 2021, and I started with Brian and Nancy and his family, and then worked my way out. And there were just a variety of things that impacted it, ending up being 4 years. I mean, life happens. And there were some people who were critical to making sure it was factually correct and that sort of thing. They had, let's say a repeat bout of COVID, or, someone in their family had a challenge that had to be addressed. And then the actual printing got the actual production of it and shipping of it got disrupted by various geopolitical issues.
It's been it's
So
been a,
so
it's been
it
a
ended
crazy
up
few years.
it was 4 years. Yeah.
All right. If you had to sum up Brian in just 3 words,
Uh,
what would that? And I am sure that's a very, very difficult question. Uh,
it's a question I asked every single person I interviewed. You'd think I'd have it at the top of my head, but I would want it to be my answer. He is authentic. He is deeply caring, and so I'm using an adjective. I hope you don't mind. He's
Absolutely.
he's sincerely authentic, deeply caring, and incredibly insightful.
Thank you. Thank you. Wendy, this has been fantastic, truly, truly fantastic. For me, an absolute privilege to get you to sit down with me for this long. The book is fantastic. For the listeners, I will tag both Wendy's LinkedIn and the book's website. Uh, Friends, if you are in insurance, read it. Honestly, like we do not get enough books about insurance icons, and this one is rare and fantastic, and there is a lot to learn here. So truly, when we first started the podcast 7 years ago, my co-founder Nick Lamparelli used to ask every guest about the book that had really affected their insurance career. We stopped asking that question because the same book kept coming over and over and over. It was almost always Against the Gods, which is a fantastic book. Um, this one is, in my opinion, just as impactful going forward.
Oh, thank you.
People, take my word for it. I read a lot, and I read a lot of insurance books because I interview a lot of insurance authors. Go read this one, honestly. Wendy, thank you so much for your time today. A real pleasure. Thank you both for the work on writing this book for us, and then for being willing to come on the podcast to tell us about it. For me, it's been a wonderful experience, and best of luck in the rest of your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's been a real pleasure.